Hey, good morning, everyone. Can you see my screen? Can everyone see the first slide?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. So thanks for spending 45 minutes to an hour with me this morning. The number one goal of any training, right? And as a trainer, as I've done this for over a decade, is you really hope at the end of all this, that at the end of an hour, someone never says, boy, there's an hour of my life I'll never get back. And so we really don't want that to be the case. We don't want to get too caught up in the theoretical concepts of coaching, but want to give you some decent takeaways as a result of this 45 minutes to an hour that we're together. So Sir John Whitmore, he talked about coaching, and this quote that's at the bottom, unlocking a person's potential to maximize their own performance, is really key. We always think that we have to have tons of experience, or we negate the fact that we already have a lot of experience as a coach in different roles, not just professionally, but those things we do socially, through volunteer efforts, even our own families. So we want to make sure we don't discount those things, but enlist that skill set as we serve others. Bear with me for a second as I share something personal. I have the opportunity. I had the opportunity to teach two different basketball teams. Right, I wanted to be part of my kids' lives. So the first one was actually the girls' Fremont team from 5 years ago that went to nationals, and Fremont High School up here in Plain City, Utah. And I had them from sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, and they were easy to coach. You could ask those girls to do anything, and they would absolutely do it. They were very responsive. They already had the desire to practice outside of just the established norms and times. And then I had the chance to teach my son's team. And looking at this wonderful bunch of young men, yes, I did get the parents' permissions to share the photo, but looking at this wonderful bunch of young men, boys are definitely different to coach than young ladies, right? You could ask a young lady to do something and they can do it right away to a T. They can visualize it. Young men will look at you with a blank stare and honestly just ask you to repeat it about 3 to 5 different times. So what happened was I took this team, and this is Clearfield in Clearfield, Utah, and we played like Central Davis and a bunch of other AAU teams, and we went in as like a 7 seed, and we lost a lot of games by a lot and won a few games by very little, literally like 1 or 2 points. So we go into this tournament as a 7 seed, and we beat the 10 seed, and then we face the second best team in the league. And all these young men, everything we had been practicing up to that point, right? Uh, they had individual skills they were working on, but at the same time, there were things that we did together as a team that we had lost track of. We were down by 15 with about 3.5 minutes left, and I just called a timeout. And to be quite honest, as a coach, I had absolutely no clue what to do. So we're all together in the huddle, and we look up at the scoreboard. The kids are feeling a little bit dejected. And I looked at them, I told them, hey, we got them exactly where we want them. And they looked at me like I was not all there at the moment, but they just started laughing. I didn't teach them anything new. I didn't teach them at that time. When the game is there and when the game is on, most of the coaching goes away. But helping get them into the right mindset to learn to do those things that they were already taught how to do. They went on to come back, and then they won that game. And then as a theme of that tournament, we played the 3rd seed. We're down by 12 again with 4 minutes left, and they won that game, and before getting literally blown out in the championship game. But it was a lot of fun. And these young men, as I look at our coaching experiences that we've taken part in our lives, and these young men taught me a lot about coaching in everything regards, from preparation all the way about to how you practice. I mean, think about that alone. So often when people say role play, right, or real application, we kind of we bristle when we hear those things. But the reality is that is where the true learning takes place. So we're just going to look at some coaching insights from some of the most successful coaches, and we'll look at sports first. So under manager Joe Girardi, the New York Yankees baseball team, they won their 27th World Series championship title, right? He won more than 500 games as a manager. And he talks about how his key to coaching is preparation. It's the same whether you're managing rookies or stars, he said. In either case, you have to lead by example. And that's so powerful. You ask your players to be prepared mentally and physically, so you in turn have to be prepared. Beyond that, you've got to adapt to the type of players you have. Sometimes we lead teams or are part of teams that we maybe necessarily you didn't. It's not like you drafted those folks, right? But you have the opportunity. Everyone that comes and that's on your team has strengths, and how do you bring those out? You can't make them on the same person. Embrace their strengths and differences. So the first full time Becky Hammon, she's the first full time assistant coach in NBA history, and she learned respect from many of the players throughout the league. Uh, Paul Gasol, who played for the Lakers and won a couple of championships, he said that she was the best coach, uh, male or female, was regardless of male or female or of gender. He said he's played under the sharpest minds, Phil Jackson, Greg Popovich, and he says that, you know what, I'm telling you, Becky Hammon can coach, period. And she said, she gave some good wisdom. She said, you have these people speaking really good things in your life, and it grows and produces fruit later on. But somebody had to initially plant those good seeds. Hope and encouragement, and especially hope, is probably one of the greatest things you can give another person. Now, that's baseball, that's basketball. Let's go to football. For those of you who know that football is soccer, in America we might call it soccer, but one of the most winning coaches for Manchester United, Sir Alex Ferguson, right? He said few people get better with criticism. Most respond to encouragement. So I tried to give encouragement when I could. For a player, for any human being, there's nothing better than hearing the words, well done. These are the two best words ever invented. And you don't need to use superlatives. For Ferguson, one of the keys was closely observing his players. And that's something we'll talk about a little bit later, that we don't always do. We can do a better job of as coaches, right? As those that we lead in teams, as managers and leaders, we can watch what they're doing. When you see a change in a player's habits or a sudden dip in their enthusiasm, then you can talk to them. Is it family problems? Are they struggling financially? I mean, Mr. Ferguson would even ask him, are they tired? Is there something else going on in your life? He could tell when a player was injured that he thought was fine, excuse me. Many people don't fully understand the value of observing. And he came to see observing as a critical part of his management skills. The ability to see things as they really are is key, or more specifically, the ability to see things you don't expect to see. So long before there is, finally, we'll talk about Bill Walsh. And this is pretty interesting because Steve Young and Joe Montana are two different quarterbacks. The way they played, the way they studied for the game. Right? Long before the era of like sophisticated player analytics and looking at outcomes and modeling, Walsh was known as a very cerebral and strategic coach. He coached at Stanford also, right? He said, you're actually striving for two things at the same time. An organization where people understand the importance of their jobs, and they're committed to living within the confines of those jobs and to taking direction. We've all had team members and people on our teams who might know a lot, but they're not teachable. And that's huge. We need to be able to take direction. People feel creative and adaptive and are willing to change their minds without feeling threatened. That's key. That's what we want to cultivate. His two most famous quarterbacks, as we said, Joe Montana and Steve Young, came from opposite ends of this spectrum. Early on, he said that he had to encourage Joe Montana to trust his spontaneous instincts. He said we were careful not to criticize him when he used his creative abilities and things didn't work out. Instead, we nurtured him to use his instincts. He said we had to allow him to be wrong on occasion and live with it. Now, this was exactly the opposite case with Steve Young. He had to work with him to be disciplined enough to live within the confines of the strict framework that they were doing. So just some brief viewpoints of coaching from four of the greatest minds in sports coaching. So this morning, what's this all about, right? Well, we hope the objectives today are to increase our understanding and introduce you to some new tools. So we'll do both of those this morning. Again, we'll talk about coaching's impact on organizational goals. There's 5 different coaching conversations. Sometimes it's easier to split these things up when we split it up into 5 different areas, right? And we can look at each of those 5 and see those conversations. The coach's role as developer of talent. If people want to come to your organization, we talk about this all the time, and we see this in uh, different arenas, right? The lack of a career ladder. Well, if there's no career ladder, right, and things that are going on, how do you help them develop talent? How do you help them understand they're a part of something bigger than themselves? That the skills, abilities that they bring will make the organization better and the lives of those they serve have a direct impact. And then finally, we'll briefly talk about applying all these coaching contexts in the new normal. So those are the four things that we'll discuss this morning, right? All right, let's let's begin the ride. So when we talk about coaching, if you think about the very word and where it came from, coaching literally means to take someone from one place to another. The word is named after the city in which those carriages were designed, right? And so that's what we do as a coach. We take them from one place to another. Your organization and teams, they depend on coaching so much. When coaching is important to look at employees as volunteers, and this is helpful. Why do we look at employees as volunteers? Well, there's two reasons. First, they choose to be with your organization. They are coming to us. They are giving us a chance to help them better their skills, advance themselves. And then second, they give discretionary effort, right? In state government especially, it's a bit difficult because those who are career service, unless you do something immoral or unethical, right, you most likely aren't going to lose your job. Now, jobs that involve the complexities of people or nature seem to take the longest to master. The average age at which those on the S&P 500, right, CEOs are hired is 52. 52, not 22. And the age of maximum productivity for other scientists like geologists, well, one survey estimated that's around 54. So if you take only one idea from our visit today, make it this one, please. The most powerfully motivating condition people experience at work is making progress at something that is personally meaningful. Again, the most powerfully motivating condition people experience at work is making progress at something that is personally meaningful. If your job involves leading others as a manager, these implications are clear. The most important thing you can do each day is to help your team members experience progress at their meaningful work. So to do so, you must understand what drives each person. You help build those connections as a team. And in this era of the new normal, when some folks are remote or we're not around each other quite as much, that can be a bit of a challenge, but there's some things that we can explicitly do to bridge that gap, and we'll talk about that. We must understand what drives each person, help build those connections, and then work toward the organization's mission and strategic objectives. We can do this, but you have to know them yourself, right? We also need to provide feedback and help each person learn and grow on an ongoing basis. Regular communication around development or having these coaching conversations is essential. In fact, according to research, the single most important managerial competency that separates highly effective managers from average ones is coaching itself. So the coach's impact on organizational goals, right? Employees whose manager involved them in setting goals were nearly 4 times more likely to be engaged than other employees. Yet only 30% of employees experience this basic expectation. Why the disconnect? Sometimes we think that we're too busy to do coaching. Sometimes we feel that we don't know, we don't trust our own skills enough. And that's okay. Those are things to be cognizant of, but not to be prohibitive of us engaging in the coaching effort. Employees who receive daily feedback from their manager are 3 times more likely to be engaged than those who receive feedback once a year or less. Now, if I asked you right now what the form was for the most common feedback that we receive in government, right? We could guess, and you might roll your eyes, but it's the wonderful performance management, right? We do the performance review, and that's where sometimes the only feedback we get. And that's dangerous. That can't be the only thing. But yet it's easy to chalk it up to just the system itself and say, well, just those performance reviews, they don't work. Well, that's not entirely true. If we see them for what they are, the tool that we're supposed to enlist, then they actually do. But the feedback itself needs to be meaningful. It has to be based on understanding of the individual's strengths. How well do we know those people that work with us? As a rule, managers and leaders should give their employees meaningful feedback at least once a week. These coaching conversations can vary, as we'll talk about in a moment. Now, while many organizations are changing their annual review systems, accountability is still important. Managers should have progress reviews at least twice a year that are achievement oriented. Now, this is not from other coaching conversations. This is just progress reviews, and that they need to be fair and accurate, and they should center on development. Performance measurement needs to be paired with individualized development. If managers don't merge individual employee development with their performance measurement, the people they lead may look at performance measurement as a threat, and their development becomes disconnected actually from the organizational goals, which is the furthest thing that we want. All right. So, two key points in coaching. The coaching process, as it says there, involves an observational assessment. So often, we give feedback to folks and we offer to coach people or even listen to what's going on in their lives and give suggestions without seeing what's happening. Odds are that a lot of us have been promoted to our positions because we did our prior jobs very well. Okay. Now, managers can learn to be good coaches. It's something that's not instinctive. We always like to chalk things up to this aura of they were born that way. And you know what? Yeah, there are some attributes or characteristics that lend themselves to coaching that some of these folks might possess, but they're not born that way, right? And then it's important to focus on first understanding those worker strengths and how those strengths can be engaged in skill development. What strengths and skills do they possess, and how do they want to advance those? So, just for a second, we want to think about the impact, right, of coaches and mentors in our lives. So, who's been a coach or a mentor in your personal or professional life? Think about this for a second. A coach or a mentor, and what are the best qualities and skills of that person? I need to share with you something that illustrates this point even further, right? I first started working in human services in the year 2000, and my first boss, he was awesome, awesome individual. His name was Finiunga, and I was working at Mill Creek. They had just added a section. There was like 107 young people in the facility at that time, and there was a young man who they asked me to take down the cottage, right? So we're in the shop, and they say, "Hey, take this young man down to his cottage, his unit." And I thought, you know what? This is awesome. They're trusting me. I've only been here a week, and they're trusting me to take this young man down to his cottage, down to with his staff down where he resides. Right. Uh, Slight problem. We get down there, and the first Sally port opens. The airlock comes open, and we walk through it. Second door comes open, and we walk through it. And there's a day room. And I drop off the young man. I wave goodbye to him, and I go back up and report back to my supervisor how it went so well. So then he asked me just one question. He said, "Hey, who'd you pass him off to?" And my heart sunk. I I didn't pass him off to anybody. So thank goodness the young man wasn't overly agitated, right? And I go back down right away. I run down, and he's there just sitting in a chair in the day room and just smiling with the biggest grin on his face. So I talked to him, and then I passed him off to the staff that was in the office so he could talk to him. But then something very impactful happened with me. Finney took me aside and talked to me and explained to me how we do things. He didn't judge me, right? We need to make the biggest thing I learned from that is that where possible, there's more room for mistakes than we allow. But what do we turn those mistakes into? He was able to teach me. And from that, the way he taught me and the lessons that I learned were very impactful. And those are the skills that for me personally that I wish to develop as I continue to work with folks, serve people and serve alongside them is how to understand that mistakes happen. That's one thing for me personally, and how to develop them though, not to repeat them all the time, but to learn from them and be a good coach. So let's shift gears a second and let's talk about the different type of meetings that we have that folks who report to us, right, that we have with them. So the first we talked about was the performance review. It's annual. It's a bit retrospective. Again, we talk about objectives and responsibilities, and we won't belabor this, but it's just to preface what we're going to talk about next. And then another meeting type is those one-on-ones, typically weekly or bi-weekly. You can discuss the flow of current work, assignments, job responsibilities, fairly informal. And then finally, a coaching session. Generally a couple times a week, right? Simply replacing or supplementing annual reviews with more frequent conversations isn't enough. That doesn't work. Coaching discussions demand substance and purpose without employees feeling micromanaged. We don't want them to feel like we are constantly hovering over them and don't trust the work that they were hired to do. So let's look at these 5 coaching conversations, and this is from Gallup, and it's the manager. It's a book called "It's the Manager," and there'll be a reference for it at the end of this presentation. So different performance scenarios will require different approaches. Employees who have complex jobs need coaching that's more focused on defining general outcomes for success and plenty of autonomy and support to achieve those expectations. Again, we talked about how micromanaging doesn't really work in those kinds of jobs. Now, in contrast, employees in less complex roles can accomplish their jobs more effectively when they do have specific goals and prescriptive steps on how to do their work. Now, this is that practical framework for coaching conversations that Gallup discovered, and when to establish expectations, continually coach, and create accountability using these 5 coaching conversations. So the first one involves role and relationship orientation. Coaching starts with first impressions. The primary objectives of this initial conversation is to get to know the individual and their strengths, and to establish expectations that align with the person's strengths and the organization's overall objectives, right? Now, these can take place when there are role changes too. This isn't just for when it's a new employee. And then managers define what success looks like in the individual's role. This is where roles and expectations must be made clear. Most times when performance isn't achieved, most, not all, is when expectations aren't clear. And then we chalk this up to laziness or a lack of motivation, when in reality, there's conflicts in terms of who does what or what's taking place, right? So be very clear and specific in roles and expectations. Now, the second one, this can happen once a year, right? And you discuss employees' purpose, goals, metrics, development. One time a year, duration is usually 1 to 3 hours. The second one is ongoing daily and weekly conversations, and these serve many different purposes. For one thing, employees hate feeling ignored. Now, it's even worse than focusing on their weaknesses. Apathy can develop, and then it's hard to climb out of the hole that's been dug. Ongoing conversations that are rooted in the individual's strengths are the most engaging. A great opportunity for leaders to steer their folks in the right direction on current projects, and this can be done through email, phone, video conference, or even hallway conversations if we're able to have those. When managers master the art of this ability to quick connect, wonderful things can take place. Those that lead know they are on the right track and can proceed without unnecessary barriers. And it's a great opportunity to give recognition for success. Now, the cadence of these conversations will vary depending on the employee themselves, their strengths, and their job responsibilities. These should be at least 1 time a week, and they're not overly burdensome. 1 to 10 minutes, right? Now, the third one that we'll identify with is the check-in. More planned than quick connects, and the manager and the employee will discuss expectation, workload, goals, and needs. And this is 1 to 2 times a month, 10 to 30 minutes. The projects that they're working on, how are they progressing, right? What do they need help with? What challenges, what barriers are there? A check-in is extremely important. You'll notice that it's in the middle because it holds those things together. Then developmental coaching. This is a true art, and it's the most difficult type of conversation to master. It's most effective when the leader understands the person they are leading well, and they understand their unique personality, because one size does not fit all. Managers should have these conversations based on project assignments and development opportunities. The purpose of them is to give the person direction, support, and advice. And this can be when they're exploring different career or developmental opportunities. It can lead to skills training or action planning. Leaders need to focus on the person's strengths and accomplishments during these conversations, right? These happen at least quarterly for 10 to 30 minutes. And then finally, progress reviews. Annual reviews, as we said, they become the scapegoat for failed performance management. And this is mainly because most managers are not using the other four conversations. Annual reviews themselves not developed, more like devolved into threatening and dreaded performance meetings with enormous implications for pay and promotion. It got to the point sometimes where everyone's just successful, right? Because we don't differentiate enough and we don't do enough pre-work to be able to help these individuals progress. However, progress review conversations are a powerful coaching tool when they focus on three different things, right? Celebrating success, preparing for future achievements, and for planning for development and growth opportunities. Now, on the surface, it might seem like these five conversations are kind of like another burden already on overly scheduled managers. Who has time for all this, you might say, right? But actually, these five conversations make leading our folks more efficient. And ultimately, they will save managers significant time because with successful coaching, employees will put less energy toward misguided work efforts and unproductive politics that hurt the organization, right? Becoming an effective coach is the most important skill any manager can develop. How employees interpret their value to the organization, even their pay, will be a direct reflection on how they're coached. By mastering these five coaching conversations, managers can focus more of their time and effort on the coaching moments that matter most, finding those moments that matter most, and then taking advantage of them. So, your first coaching session, right? What should we do? So, in HBR, Harvard Business Review has a guide to coaching employees. And there's an executive coach, Ed Batista. He defines coaching as a style of management characterized by asking questions. With those questions, you can move away from command and control leadership, right, to a dynamic in which those people that you work with and that report to you grow through self-reflection. That is the most powerful. Asking the right coaching questions means the difference between a one-way interrogation and a dynamic learning session. Now, good coaching questions give someone who's busy and competent the space in which to step back and examine themselves. The right question can stop them in their tracks and finally see their own actions from a different perspective, or maybe even envision a new solution to an old problem. They may learn to question themselves so that next time they can catch themselves in the act of change, even actions in the moment, right? So we talked about preparation. Now, you need to begin by planning out what you'll ask and get yourself into the right mindset before the coaching session begins. While there are a lot of coaching questions you can't directly prepare for ahead of time, many of the ones you'll ask in the first session are fairly standard, right? So take the time to consider them beforehand. First, think about what you need to know to help the person that you're coaching. Your questions in this session will not only help you understand their situation, but also help you identify who they really are. Current developmental level and goals, what they're ready for, what they can handle, what's the next step in their journey. Now, you need to be able to do this to help them progress. Skill level, right, against leadership competencies and behaviors. Preferences, how she processes information or makes decisions. We talk about Myers-Briggs, personality inventories, that type of categorization. Motivation and values. What drives your employee every day? Why do they come to work? It's easy to say, hey, they come for a paycheck. And that's partly true, right? But there's other things that they could be doing, but they choose not to. Habits and structures that might be holding them back. And think about how you'll ask those questions. To give those people that you're coaching the space to reflect and respond effectively, they should be phrased as open-ended queries, right? It can be helpful to think about the first word. Open questions often begin with what, how, who, where, and when. Stay away from why. It can feel confrontational and judgmental. To get at the same thing, instead ask, like, what was your intention with that? Instead of why did you do that? Now, we're not going to belabor this, but there's, at the end of all this, if you'd like, I can send you this PowerPoint as a PDF just for your reference and to maybe guide you in some of your coaching conversations. So the most important thing to keep in mind while composing and delivering coaching questions is that you need to be genuinely curious about the answers. People can tell if you're just asking a question because it's what you're supposed to do, right? And you won't be able to get to that one question or that one moment of self-discovery if you're just going through the motions rather than authentically interested in what they're telling you, their growth and their current situation. Now, it can take practice and rewiring because we all do have, smart as we are, it's important to suspend good habits like asserting a strong point of view. but it will help us both, you and the coachee, prepare for the session and in the moment. These are some different questions, and we won't go over this we won't spend a lot of time on this, but questions good coaches ask, right? What is happening? What is challenging about it? What would have to change to make that happen? What conditions would have to be in place? Solution focused, allowing the individual to be part of their own learning. How? How will you prepare for that? See, all too often when folks come to us, we think coaching is telling people what to do. And that's the furthest thing from the truth. Coaching and teaching are different. Yes, coaches sometimes teach, but the very act is different in nature. Who will be impacted, right? Positively or negatively by these changes? Who needs to be included or in alignment of these goals? Then there's the where and when questions. Where would you like to be your career in 3 to 5 years? This future planning, when do you feel you're at your personal best? Asking these questions, if we don't do anything with it afterward, though, that becomes dangerous. We need to be careful not to let this coaching, this person's point of view in any given situation, not to let it turn into a venting or blaming session. Instead of asking questions that might reinforce the emotional charge they feel, ask questions that open up possibilities that they might not have considered yet. For example, if the person you're coaching has, let's say, they describe an argument they had with another colleague, instead of saying things like, I can't believe that person would do that to you, or belaboring, how did that make you feel? Ask questions that pose a different perspective. I hear how frustrated you are. What do you think is going on in his world that may have led to this behavior? What does the organization need the two of you to do? What would you need to see from that person to have a better relationship? You need to be able to talk to people and let them come to their own conclusions. And then lastly, as it says there's some descriptor questions that can help us get at what's happening in a given situation. Help me understand. Tell me more about that. Now, asking these things as an automatic response and disingenuous does more to hurt people than to help. When you ask these questions, tell me more about that or help me understand, and it almost sounds like you're just asking for justification, that hurts the situation. It does not help it at all, right? There's some elements of a good coaching session. I apologize for that. That's those slides that were supposed to be hidden. But coaches develop talent. We wanted to get to that. So strangely, in most organizations, coaching isn't part of what managers are formally expected to do, even though research makes it clear that employees and job candidates alike value learning and career development above almost all other aspects of a job. Many managers just don't see it as an important part of their role. They think they don't have time to have these conversations. And many, quite frankly, feel like they lack the skill. Yet 70% of employee learning and development happens on the job, not through formal training programs. So if line managers aren't supportive and actively involved, employee growth is stunted. So is engagement and retention. Now, there are managers who coach and managers who don't. And leaders in the latter category are not necessarily bad managers, but they're neglecting an effective tool to develop talent. Now, HBR did Harvard Business Review did hundreds of interviews. And what stood out with managers who do coach their direct reports is their mindset. They believe in the value of coaching. And they think about their role as a manager in a way that makes coaching a natural part of their toolkit. Now, these aren't professional coaches, busy, hardworking people like you and I, right? Now, there's 4 ways in which coaching develops talent. First, they see coaching as an essential tool for achieving organizational goals. You need to see it for what it is. They are not coaching their people because they're nice. They see personal involvement and development of talent as an essential activity for the success of the organization. Most managers will tell you that they don't have time to coach. However, time isn't a problem if you think coaching is a must-have rather than a nice-to-have. Whether it's because they're competing for talent, operating in a highly turbulent workplace, or trying to retain those folks who are excelling, they need to learn how to grow their solid players. They believe that simply they have to take time to coach. Now, there's 2 assumptions behind this belief. First, that extremely talented people are hard to find and recruit. We see that. We know that. If you are known as a manager who will help those people thrive, they will gravitate towards you. If they understand that you can help, you can be a reason why partly they succeed. I think of jobs that I've had in the past, and I can only speak from personal experience, but when I've seen around me is when folks don't feel like the organization or their leadership is helping them develop, that's when they become disengaged. Productivity goes down, their engagement goes down, morale goes down. It's just a succession of dominoes that continue to fall. The second thing is that an organization cannot be successful on the backs of just the extremely talented people alone. You need stars, you need solid players, and coaching can help build those skills. The second reason why coaches develop talent is they enjoy helping people develop. These managers are not unlike artists, right? They can take something. I did paint night one time, right? I went to paint night. If any of you ever seen paint night, and I did this one, it was called Deer on Fire. And I was waiting for Alicia Keys to sing in the background. It was the worst looking painting. I have it in my cubicle at work, and it is. I'll be honest. I'll be the first to admit it is the worst painting I have ever seen in my life. But I was proud of it. I did it. I went with a friend who was constantly critiquing my painting to the point where other people were just turning theirs away. But it was a very interesting thing, right? But it's like being an artist, imagining something better, more interesting, and more valuable can emerge. These people assume that people who work for them don't necessarily show up ready to do the job, but they will need to learn and grow to fulfill their role and adapt to these changing circumstances, especially in the current climate. They do believe that those with the highest potential, who can often contribute the most to the organization, will need help to realize their ambitions, and that's important. And we talked about the importance about being genuinely curious and not being pretentious. And then finally, they're interested in establishing connections. Think of it this way: this is what I like to think. Someone would listen to you because they believe that for the time you are really trying to put yourself in their shoes. This empathy allows the coaching manager to build an understanding of what each employee needs and then appropriately adjust their style. Some employees might come to a coach with a give it to me straight attitude or I can take it. Others need time to think and to come to their own conclusions. That trusting, connected relationship helps managers better gauge which approach to take. Talk for a second about giving feedback that sticks. Think about this. How many hours in a day? Let's take the 5-day work week at least, right? With hygiene and sleep and eating, probably at least 8 or 9 of those hours of a 24-hour a day are gone. Another eight are at work at least. Let's be honest. At least, okay? So giving that feedback that sticks, jobs are part of who we are. When we're called to do the work in which we are, we're giving of ourselves. We're enlisting our skill set, our passions, our knowledge to advance not only the organization, but the lives of those individuals that we serve within it and alongside. Think about the last time you heard, can I give you some feedback? Whenever we say this, can I give you some feedback? It elicits that threat response. Okay. Although coaching is primarily about asking questions rather than providing answers, sometimes our employees will actually want feedback on their performance. And that's an opportunity that we have. Excuse me. I love how we tell people not to take it personal. Yet, how can you honestly say that when this is part of what we do? This is who we are, right? So we need to be tender. We need to be tender and genuine. So here's some ways to not trigger a threat response when you're giving feedback, right? Cultivate the relationship, manage emotions, play fair, and set the stage. We're going to briefly talk about each of those. So cultivating the relationship, making people aware that you see them as individuals, not merely as employees, right? Or just a cog in the great big machine. It's a critical step in the process. But it doesn't need to be overly time consuming. Make a habit of asking those we are working with one question about their work or personal lives each day. Wherever you can, connect. I know my manager does a great job of coming by and talking to me and sitting down. He'll ask me questions about personal questions about my life, how things are going on, what projects I'm working on, things like that. Phenomenal job at that. And it's not an inquisition. It's just asking and genuinely wondering, which is awesome. So we seek attention from those around us, not only in obvious ways, but also through countless subtle bids, right? John Gottman, he writes something called The Relationship Cure. He said, a bid can be a question, a gesture, a look, a touch. Any single expression that says, I want to feel connected to you. A response to a bid is just that, a positive or negative answer to somebody's request for emotional connection. So we're less observant of social cues from people over whom we wield any type of authority. But we need to make the other person feel known, respond to those small bits for affirmation, and regularly express appreciation. They talk about the ratio of positive to negative is 5 to 1, and we need to make sure that that's at least that. Managing emotions, they're an essential part of the reasoning process. We know that when learning takes place, it's the best learning is usually tied to emotion. So the right amount of emotion depends on the issue you're addressing and varies from one relationship to another. Yeah, quite honestly, even sometimes from one day to the next. The key question is how responsive the other person will be to your emotions and being cognizant of theirs. So David Bradford of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, he coined this concept of staying on your side of the net. Focus on feedback, on our feelings about the behavior, and avoid references about the other person's motives. An example, right? And habitually late staff guesses about the state of mind, not facts. You don't value my time. It's very disrespectful of you. Well, that's not the most skillful way. A better way is to talk about your feelings, right? When we avoid references to the other person's motives, we're in safe territory, basically on our side of the net. Others may not like what we say when we describe how we feel, but really there's no disputing its accuracy. However, when we make guesses about their motives, we cross over to their side of the net. And even minor inaccuracies can provoke a defensive reaction and really damage that relationship for future coaching efforts. And then finally, setting the stage. Uh, Timing, shorter, informal feedback conversations are best. The two best times are actually at the beginning of the day or the end. Beginning before we're preoccupied or have engaged in other activities that detract you from that conversation and the goals thereof, or at the end of the day, not before or after a stressful experience. We often put events on our calendars for a standard amount of time without considering what's needed for each interaction. Think about how much time, the duration, be flexible. Physical location should suit the needs of the conversation. A less formal setting, such as a conference room or a restaurant or even outdoors, will put you on a more even footing and reduce that likelihood of a threat response. Now, with a little practice, these guidelines will help you improve your feedback skills. As with any skill you're trying to master, experiment in low risk situations before jumping into a high stakes feedback conversation. So, listening is important. There's some common coaching mistakes that we need to be aware of. Coaching the mini me, right? Coaching is about helping your team member reach their own potential. Yet, time and time again, managers instead try to coach individuals into their own image. Don't fall into this trap of trying to coach your team member into like a replica of yourself. They'll become rapidly disengaged from the coaching process. Both your attempt to support them and their attempt to deliver will prove literally unsustainable over time. So meet the person as it says there in terms of skill, capability, and commitment. Your team members have different strengths and weaknesses, and we need to be aware of those. Sometimes another common coaching mistake is thinking coaching is special time, right? It's a special time. I need to set the stage, set the mood. I don't know, it's almost like the Little Mermaid, right? You got to create the mood. That makes no sense. Okay, there is some things behind it, and you need to prepare for those. But if you're always waiting for the most optimal time and situation and environment, good luck. You're going to be waiting for a long time. We do all that we can to make it conducive to a learning atmosphere, and then we do it, right? We integrate that coaching into daily life. The best we need to honestly we just need to make it a practice to coach in the moment. Moments that matter. Find the moment that matters and coach. If your employee is about to prepare for something, proactively maybe spend a few minutes with coaching them on how right how they'll approach it. What's the deliverable? If they've completed an assignment, debrief with them some coaching questions that can help them learn from the experience and use the knowledge next time around. Finally, coaching requires patience, and it's not about pushing or pulling your team members, though it might seem that way, directly to the specific results that we want them to achieve. It's more like watching on the sidelines during game time, letting them find their own way, stepping back, and letting them make mistakes or just different choices from those you would have made. That's where we get into some interesting things. Sometimes if the choice that was made worked, but maybe not the way we wanted it to work, we think it was wrong and we give feedback that's not really helpful. So, or we want to snatch the task away and do it ourselves. We just need to understand that if we're going to make the employee throw up their hands and act like we're giving up on them, then why shouldn't they? Watch our tone. Just some three common mistakes we need to be aware of. So now, finally applying these things to the new normal, right? So sharing coaching. There's a picture right there, and these folks are the great example illustration of sharing coaching is the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra based in New York City. Now it's a 26-person ensemble that both rehearses and performs without a conductor. Although that orchestra has no leader on the podium, it has much more leadership than do orchestras known for their famous conductors. For each piece of music, the orchestra chooses to perform. One violinist is selected by his or her peers to serve as the concert master. That person manages the rehearsal process for that piece, beginning each rehearsal, fielding questions from members about interpretive matters, deciding when, like if there's disagreements among members, must be set aside. They just take a shared coaching approach. Now, there's an abundant shared leadership and peer-to-peer coaching in this unusual orchestra, but it is far from a one person, one vote democracy. Now, there are times for that, but most times that's not needed. Orpheus members are quite discriminating about who is invited to have a special say in the preparation of each piece. Only some violinists are chosen to serve as concert masters, for example, and it's clear to all which have earned the right to be listened to. Excuse me, not all, and that's the thing, is that they all bring something special to the team, but what they do is they realize that they're not all equals, and that's not bad. Each individual brings special talents and interests to the ensemble and has some areas of relative disinterest and lesser strengths. So the orchestra's willingness to acknowledge, to respect, and to literally exploit the individual differences among its members is one of its greatest assets as a self-managing team. Now, one of the things that helps peer coaching work so well with the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra is that those who are coaching are also playing in the orchestra, and therefore they are always there. Good coaching helps team members practice and learn the skills and rewards of being superb self-managers and leaders. And that's highly unlikely to happen if the coach isn't around. Recognize hidden opportunities is another way to apply these concepts to the new normal. Being behind a screen can create new opportunities for certain team members, making space for those who might be less inclined to speak out. Text-based communication places less importance on interpersonal skills and physical appearance, although video conferencing physical appearance is extremely important, right? Research shows that introverted individuals are less inhibited online versus offline. However, you need to watch out for maybe even like virtual unconscious bias, where punctuation, grammar, and word choice might reveal prejudiced attitudes towards certain groups. The absence of body language doesn't necessarily mean that we're not giving away more than we intend when we communicate remotely. There's still a great deal of meta communication, virtual leakage, right? That happens in digital environments. And then the last one on this, and applying this to the normal, is creating intentional space for celebration. Old school birthday cakes are still important for remote teams. Creating virtual spaces and rituals for celebrations and socializing can strengthen relationships and lay that foundation for future collaboration. Find ways to shorten what they call affinity values, right? Affinity distance, values, trust, and interdependency. So as more and more of our interactions happen digitally, we will continue to experience new forms of miscommunication and misunderstanding. That solution will not come from new technologies, although no doubt many developers are trying to bridge that gap. Instead, the solution is in understanding the new rules of engagement and building a communication skill set that reflects the demands of our constantly changing situations. Okay, so I want to conclude by sharing you a story of Icarus. Now, when I was at Rick's College, which is one of the finest liberal arts institutes, right? University or colleges in the nation, liberal arts, Rick's College, there you go. I had a humanities teacher that laid on a podium. He was about 6'6", and literally a pole. And he laid on a podium that was about 18 inches wide to demonstrate line. And he told us this story about Icarus. Now, in Greek mythology, Icarus, he's the son of that master craftsman who created the labyrinth. No, not the 80s David Bowie movie, but the labyrinth in Greek mythology. Icarus and his father attempted to escape from Crete, right, by means of these wax wings that his father constructed from feathers and wax. Icarus's father warns him first of complacency and then of hubris, right? Now hubris, what that is, that's that personality quality of extreme or foolish pride or dangerous overconfidence. So he asks that he fly neither too low nor too high, so the sea's dampness would not clog his wings nor the sun's heat melt them. Now, Icarus, as we know, ignored his father's instructions not to fly too close to the sun. When the wax in his wings melted, he tumbled out of the sky and fell into the sea. And that's where he drowned. Now, it sparked the idiom, don't fly too close to the sun, right? There's a good lesson here that gets to the heart of coaching. Like Icarus, many of us have great strengths that seduce us. These strengths often lead to our early successes, but eventually we become enamored with them or overly reliant on them. Then we cover up our weaknesses or fail to recognize the need to change something that seems natural and right. To expose our weaknesses or change something which has been successful for us, and then doing something new is difficult, especially if we are full of pride. It requires a commitment to not only change but also learning. Coaching is having both the toughness and the compassion to skillfully intervene in people's learning processes. A successful coaching relationship is always a story of transformation, not just higher levels of performance. It's a story that takes people beyond their immediate passion and pride. And it helps them to come to grips with the fact that to reach what is really possible and achievable for them, they must be willing to fundamentally question who they are, what they do, and why they do it. So to begin our coaching journey, right, we need to find a good coach. As a manager, you need to ask yourself a few different questions. Find a good coach in your organization. Uh, does your organization have talent that needs to compete? If not, why not? Have you done a poor job of hiring, or are people not performing up to their potential? It's really either one or the other. The second thing is understand that before you start coaching, you need to develop a culture of trust and a solid relationship with those people you will be coaching. In spite of our good intentions, all the techniques in the world will make little difference if those we're trying to coach don't feel connected to us in some way. Third, we need to learn some basic coaching principles. Now, we specifically didn't get into different modalities today, and there's several because we didn't want to get caught up in the weeds, right? There's some specific things that are common amongst all those different coaching models, and that's what we try to touch upon a little bit this morning. Finally, the mindset should be focused on the people. It really is about the people. Coaching is about them, not us. Now, as Dan alluded to a couple weeks ago, I am from the nation's first capital, Philadelphia. But I thought about this, and this is a quote I like. You just have to keep working. You're not always going to have a great day. You should never get down. You should always learn from those experiences and look forward to working through them, because that's the beautiful thing. When you look back at the journey, there were bumps in the road, but you were able to overcome them with the help of the people around you, the people that believe in you and love you. That's a special thing. This quote is from Nick Foles, the Super Bowl 52 MVP. And when I thought about that, if you know anything about football, even when he came, Carson Wentz was a quarterback. He was an MVP type season. And toward the last remaining 3 games of the year, he had a season ending injury. And this young man stepped up and went on one of the greatest runs and most memorable moments in Philadelphia sports history, maybe even outside of that. These are some of the excellent coaching resources. It's The Manager by Gallup. This book was referred to earlier in some of Dan's earlier conversations. The HBR Guide to Coaching Employees. Performance Coaching by Sir John Whitmore, which was the quote on the title slide. He talks about how as we coach for performance, it affects other areas. And then this Masterful Coaching by Robert Hargrove. So these are some really good, like these guides these HBR guides are awesome resources. So the next webinar of the Off the Shelf series will be on the 9th of September. So you can see the Google Calendar icon there. So get your calendars ready. And it will be done by Rick Murdoch. Talk about From a Distance, a guide to robust virtual distance and hybrid teams. Some of the things that they'll talk about there that Rick will be able to discuss with you is achieving that team success in a virtual environment, coaching and performing from a distance, and then addressing virtual team dysfunction. Highly recommend that if you have the time, please put that on the Off the Shelf series, 9th of September at 10 a.m. So in conclusion, thanks for visiting today. Trust the process, right? Trust the process. Yes, I know it's painful. The Sixers are out of it right now, but they are just giving themselves more time for a shortened season to make it to the finals and win it next year. That is Joel Embiid and I. Quick story behind that. went to a Jazz game. My son was in his competitive uniform, Sixers uniform, and they said they looked at me and my son, and I said I trusted the process, I trusted it, and you're not playing. And then they pointed to my son and I, and they said, "Come on the court." I was so excited. I began to go on the court, and security did not let me. They were pointing to my son, and he went and shot basketball with some of the Sixers players a couple years ago. But that's important to understand. I'm only on one riser. Joel's 7 feet tall, and I'm 6'8". So again, thanks for visiting today. If you have further questions or need additional resources, or if you would even like a copy of this PowerPoint, I can send that to you, osenbach@utah.gov, and that's my number. Thank you for spending time with us. Hopefully this was worth your time and your investment. All right. Thank you.